ICT Council. He is now serving as a director and coach for Servio Technologies, Surpass, A, Office Guru, Code Scholarship Fund, and the Mijares Durango Cranlo Facial Foundation. Joining in him is his son, JC, who is a full stack developer and the author of Denim, a low code development tool for creating enterprise grade business applications.
Good morning. Welcome to everybody. Greetings from a social distance. My name is Joey Durango, as they uh, introduced me. Um, and I'm here to get this session started about what it's like to be a developer or a programmer. Okay, and just to get things started, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I mean, I'm older than probably all of you, but when I started my career in IT, I started out as a programmer and I'm self-taught. I don't have a college degree, but I did teach myself how to program. And I said I was a professional developer for probably the first 20 years of my career before I shifted from doing that to running my own company full time. And I haven't actually programmed in about 15 years, which is why for this session, when they invited me to do this, I suggested that rather than listening to me talk about how to be a what it's like to be a programmer, I would bring along somebody who is still a programmer or a professional developer, and that is my son, my youngest son. And he'll introduce himself later on, but his name is JC. So he'll be doing most of the narrating in this session. The way we structure this now is that I'll be doing a bit of an introduction, like I'm doing now. He'll be doing a bit of an introduction, and I've prepared 6 questions to ask him along the way. It's only 20 minutes, so we can't spend too much time on any of the questions. But the good thing is, JC will be joining the panel later on. I think at 11 o'clock today, he'll be joining the panel discussion. And if you have any questions for him, you can certainly ask then. Okay? So that's it. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the main speaker, the real narrator for the session, which is my son, professional developer, JC Durango. Come on, come on, come on. There you go.
Hello.
So
Hi.
tell them a little bit about yourself, JC.
Hi, I'm JC. I've been working as a software developer for the last 9 years. I grew up here in the Philippines, and when I was 15, I graduated high school, and my dad basically gave me a choice. He said, "Do you want to start working, or do you want to go to college?" And he knew I was into computers. Growing up, I'd always mess with my IT teacher in school and screw up the computers one way or another. So I guess he just wanted to test me. I took an internship, and to everyone's surprise, I passed just fine and got regularized at that company. I worked in that job for a few years before I decided I should try and branch out and freelance on my own and on the side just to make a little extra money. And that side gig ended up making me more money than my job. So I decided to just freelance, just do that, for money. And that's where I'm at now. So now I write software independently and I work directly with clients.
Okay, thanks, JC. I'm glad that you're able to introduce yourself to our audience today. So, as I said, I prepared 6 questions, which are probably the most commonly asked questions for people who are looking to get into IT, to get into programming. So, let me start with the first question and then I'll go from there. Okay, so first question: what's your typical workday like as a professional developer?
Well, a typical day for me probably has me waking up at like 12. I could wake up later or earlier, like today, if I wanted to. But I feel like I'm not really a morning person, and if I wake up afternoon, I don't feel so good. Anyway, I'd get up and then I would just kind of chill for a bit, try to defrost, um, I'll drink some coffee. Like every night, I make some cold brew coffee to drink when I wake up, and I don't know, maybe play with my cats. And after a little bit of reading or watching videos, I'll do some programming for 3 or 4 hours, something like that. And and then after that, I might take a break. I mean, usually my workday also consists of other things. Like I do have to sometimes meet with people or like talk to clients, that kind of thing. But yeah, I'll work for 3 or 4 hours. I'll take a little break to maybe play some video games or like work on some of my hobbies or play with my cats. And then after an hour or so, I'll go back to work for a few more hours, and then I'll call it a day and spend the rest of the evening playing with my friends or hanging out with my fiance. Of course, sometimes I do end up taking a really long break, and I have to like spend the rest of the evening working to get something done. But it's really up to me how I want to manage my time, as long as I'm around to chat and people aren't upset if things aren't getting done.
So it seems like you have a fairly varied workday, which usually starts at a little afternoon, and you could
Mm-hmm.
probably go quite late in the evening, and sometimes maybe early in the morning, which is I think typical of
Yeah.
a lot of programmers. They
Yeah.
do their best work at night, but it seems like you have a very varied day. Although the most the biggest chunk of time is spent programming. What is that exactly?
Well, so a lot of the people here, probably think that programming is coding, like actually writing code. Which, yeah, I mean, you do code. You do have to code to program, of course. But that's a lot like saying playing guitar is just playing the right notes in the right order, or saying that speaking is saying the right words in the right order. You know, it's a lot more than that. What programming is to me is codifying the real world, which is like messy and unpredictable, into a system that's easy to understand for people and easy to interact with. The best software in the world is totally transparent. Like you shouldn't even know that it's there, that there's some piece of technology doing something for you. So the best software developers in the world have to have this really deep understanding of the needs of the people that they're writing the software for. And they also need to have the problem solving skills to solve those problems using, well, software systems. And so it's really just like solving word problems all day, except they're like actually real scenarios, if that makes sense.
So it's about problem solving more than anything else. It seems.
Yeah.
You see, and when you talk about problem solving, does that mean that you have to be a whiz at mathematics?
Not necessarily. You can also just be kind of good at thinking through problems in general, just like talking through them, and you yourself could still be a programmer. It's not all about math. There's some algebra.
It's more about logic, problem
Yeah.
solving logic than math, right? Because some people think that you have to be a whiz at calculus or something like that to be a good programmer. It sounds like no, you don't have to do.
You do for some industries. If you're mapping statistics or something, definitely want to have some kind of background in mathematics. But like a lot of the systems that I write are like HR or like um, trying to sell services, e-commerce. So like I don't you generally don't need to know a lot of math for that.
Okay. Let's move on to our third question. The third question is, so anybody here who is looking to get into IT, they want to get into the IT industry. Does that mean that if you want to get into IT, you have to be a programmer? Does someone have to be a programmer to get into the IT industry?
Well, I would say no matter what industry you're in, I think you can really benefit from at least learning to code. Like I think I think code is becoming a very fundamental skill, and especially since we're starting to rely more and more on computers to do stuff for us, it'd be good to know what that's doing. Um, Also, like learning to solve problems in a linear fashion, like you would with writing software, is very useful in a multitude of industries. Like, I think anytime somebody uses the term resourceful to mean something like the person is very intuitive with working with using the stuff that he has to make things work. I feel like that term resourceful says that somebody thinks like a programmer, even though they're not necessarily a programmer. Uh, but other than programmers, I mean, there's a lot going on in IT, and there's many jobs that you can do that doesn't actually involve developing the software. For example, QA testing is necessary and important and often overlooked. Like, I, as a software developer, can write some very fancy automated tests and make sure every little corner of the system has like a test that covers it. But nothing can really compare to a human being using your system and getting incredibly frustrated at some of the decisions you've made. Like, you can write a test to make sure that a button does what you think it should do, but you can't write a test to make sure that you think it should do the right thing. Like, some decisions you have to make, and sometimes you're going to get it wrong. And other than QA, there's also people who manage the IT infrastructure. A lot of companies are moving to the cloud now, with AWS and Google and Azure. But somebody is still back there at Amazon or Google making sure everything is working, making sure all the hardware is connected. I read that Google has a hard drive failure every hour or so. Somebody has to replace those and, cost it and manage the logistics of that and give everybody laptops. There's also many situations where cloud isn't practical, like at a bank or at any kind of government system. So for those scenarios, you need somebody who knows how to put stuff together and make things work. And even if your company uses AWS or Google Cloud or Azure, somebody still has to manage all of that infrastructure. It's not like you just say, here's my software, make it work. It's a job as well, and that's called DevOps. So there's a lot of stuff in IT other than programming, and even other than those, like somebody just has to like talk to clients. Somebody needs to be speaking to them, and you get paid a lot more if you can do that.
So it sounds like, JC, that the answer is no, you don't have to be a programmer to get into IT, that there are many other job roles and other career opportunities within the IT industry that does not require you to do programming work, that you don't have to be a programmer. But what I caught at the beginning, what you said though, is that it does help, not just in IT, but in any profession, to be a good problem solver, which is essentially what a programmer does. So I guess another way to put it is that you don't have to be a programmer to get into IT, but if you want to get into IT and excel at it, having a programmer's mindset, would be very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And also in other industries, just being that guy who solves problems is very useful.
Okay, let's move on to our next question. And you've been doing this now, like you said, for 9 years. I've been in the IT industry for over 35 years. But it would be interesting to know, since you've been in it just the last 9 years, when I'm no longer the programmer, but I do other stuff now. Um, in the last 9 years and the time that you've been a professional programmer, what would you say are going to be what would you say have been the major challenges, the difficulties that you've had to face that you think people should know about before they get into this line of work?
I think the most challenging part is just trying to connect or square what people expect and the reality of software. Because software breaks, and you can make it so that a software breakdown doesn't like destroy things. You can isolate systems to make sure that this thing doesn't break that thing. But you really can't stop software from breaking sometimes. I mean, we just saw like a few days ago, or oh wait, I think that was last week, that Facebook went down. You know, they're the biggest company, one of the biggest companies in the world, and they hire some of the most intelligent people in the world, and yet sometimes their software just breaks down. And even the software they use at NASA for the Apollo missions, they broke sometimes. And I think the reason is that software and IT in general is a very young industry. It's not like being a doctor or a carpenter where the tools of the trade are standardized and you know there's standard procedures. Like there's only really one way to do a tracheotomy. IT and computers have only been around for like 60 years if you're gonna be generous about it. And the biggest software companies today, like Microsoft and Apple, they only came about in the 80s. That's only 40 years ago. That's within a lot of people's lifetimes. And many people remember a day when there was no Apple or Google. And even if you're not that old, you probably remember when Google wasn't that big. Although now that I think about it, you know, probably a lot of you don't remember a time.
I think you're talking about people like me who remember a time when there was no Google, there was no Apple, there was no Microsoft, there was no Amazon. I think most of the people in the audience, JC, don't remember that time because they would have not yet been born.
Yeah, but other than being a young industry, you know, it's moving faster than any other industry, and it kind of has to because there's always new needs for software. There's always like new scenarios where you need to use software. You know, it's like if you think about something like automation, right? You're constantly making new automations for new processes, and so the tools have to keep evolving. But you know, at a point, it does start to feel like I was a carpenter, and every year they're coming out with a new hammer that for some reason doesn't work with the old nails. But you just have to adapt and try to keep up.
I think a good analogy for the not just the newness, but the rate at which the demand for software is accelerating is kind of when the internal combustion engine, which we use in all transportation, was developed. You know, that was in the early 1900s. And as soon as they kind of got that going, it became quite apparent that everybody wanted one. The demand was just so great that they couldn't make them fast enough. They couldn't get them out fast enough. So today, the same thing has happened with software. It's a fairly new industry. It's a fairly new, I guess you could say, production type industry. But the demand is so great that you can't make software fast enough because there aren't enough programmers to make software fast enough so that they can meet the demands of the market. So it's a demand thing, right? And since we're talking about demand, the fact that there's a lot of demand and supply, the truth is, and I think you know this, not just in the Philippines, but globally, there is a shortage of experienced programmers, of good programmers. So when you have a supply and demand problem like that, obviously that affects prices, right? Because of any economics problem. So I guess the next question, which I'm sure a lot of people are interested in, given that the demand is so great and the supply is so small, that should tend to drive prices up. Well, what can they, if they become a professional programmer, what can they expect to earn as a professional programmer? What do you say to them?
I don't know a lot about the the corporate world. I haven't spent a lot of time with it. But I will say when I was working for a company, I was making between 20 and 40,000 a month. But if you're going to talk about like freelancing, like what I do now, I don't think anybody will hire you as a freelancer until you have some work to show. You know, you got to remember that the people who are hiring freelancers, they're not they're usually not like big companies. They're usually um, either individuals or companies of a few people that want somebody who will just get the thing done already, and you have to know how to get the thing done. So you have to prove that you can do the job. So generally speaking, fresh out of high school or college, you just have to get a regular job. And that doesn't need to be a programming job. I have friends who didn't work as programmers and just did something else while they learned and tried to build a portfolio. Like I know one guy who did like the subtitles for TV and movies, which is kind of boring, but it didn't drain him and it gave him enough free time to learn how to program. And I knew another guy who, well, I know another guy who worked in a call center, and he was like learning when he wasn't taking calls, and worked on some projects, on the weekends. You just need some people who need software. So the bottom line is you need something, just anything to show the potential clients and say, hey, here's some work I've done. Maybe you want me to make something for you. And because of the demand problem, as you said, people aren't that picky unless they have a lot of money.
So it seems to me like you're answering the question by basically saying, in the early days of entering this profession, whether you do work as an employee or as a freelancer, if that's even possible, don't expect this to be a high-paying job. Because what you're trying to get at that beginning is experience. And actually, even if your first job wasn't programming, what you should be doing is you need to pay the bills first of all, and support yourself. But you can actually spend time away from your regular job, gaining the experience, gaining the skills, gaining the knowledge, so that in 4 or 5 years' time, maybe you will be capable enough to get a good paying programming job, whether that's in a corporate environment or in a freelancer. But so let's kind of jump. Let's go fast forward. You said, and I know this for a fact. Entry level programmers, you're looking at maybe 15 to 20,000 pesos a month is a typical salary, or depending on where you are and what company it is. But that's a typical.
I made less than that as an intern. So
yeah, when you were an intern, I know you made less than that when you were an intern. That's because that was an intern, right?
Yeah.
But that's entry level. But that's give people an idea. What happens later on? Like in your case, you've been doing this for 9 years now.
Okay.
At about the 5 or 6 year mark in your career,